You want to engage with your broader community about your scientific work and the positive impact science can have on the well being of community members. And you're also interested in how engagement with the public could influence the way scientists work and think about their own research, potentially exposing biases and reshaping assumptions, resulting in better science. You've been frustrated when some media caricature scientists as if they're a foreign species, aloof and unrelatable. You want to provide space to show real scientists doing important work that can make a meaningful difference to improve the lives of community members. And you're seeking to create opportunities for scientists to dialogue with elected officials, particularly when policymaking could be informed and potentially improved by scientific findings. How should you approach these challenges and make progress towards these goals? Hey there, it's Mark Bayer, and you are tuned to When Science Speaks. In this episode, we're going to explore how to develop and advance major science communication programs with Dr. Joana Magalhães, a senior researcher and research manager at Science for Change, headquartered in Barcelona, Spain. Joana leads the scientific coordination of Coalesce, which is a project funded by the Horizon Europe program of the European Commission to establish a self sustaining European Competence Center for Science Communication and an associated Science Communication Academy. Let's dig in. Welcome to the show, Joanna. I'm so happy that you're here with us.
Hi, Mark. I'm really happy to. Thank you so much for the invitation.
You and I had a chance to talk offline about how your early research experience in tissue engineering, combined with your work experience as a filmmaker, inform your approach to science communication, which I think is fascinating. Can you share more details for listeners about that?
Yes, sure. I started my scientific career in a project, an European project led by the European Commission, and it was on establishing the future generation of tissue engineers in Europe. So I had a very multidisciplinary and multicultural approach when I started working in science, and that really is also how we can bring different perspectives in the process of making science. So I think as many young researchers at the time, I also wanted to get involved in science communication. So not only communicating to my peers, but also to other publics. And this interest became every time bigger. And also I started to understand, for example, that was a lack of diversity of women in media, that some of the topics or the state of the art science was not as much discussed as it could be, or as you mentioned before, this how we could actually, or those breakthroughs were creating an impact in society. So my approach to science communication was very much as I did as a scientist. So I used evidence-based approach. So I started to look into literature of science communication and how I could use TV production as a way to better communicate science and to create a link with different communities.
I just love this. I love how you applied your whole research background mindset to this field and then how you bring in the artistry of your filmmaking. And we're going to get to that in a second. I also want to highlight something that you talked about, which is really citizen involvement. Your philosophy when it comes to science communication, it really leans into citizen involvement in a variety of ways. And it's a two-way street as well. And so I know that listeners would be interested if you would share more detail about how you orchestrate these, how do you construct these engagements?
Yeah, so when I started that at the time, the approach was more into bringing, so using television production as a means to bring, on one side, local communities, so mainly young students and teenagers, also those that were from probably more rural areas, and then also how I could bring scientists from different stages of their careers, so young researchers and senior researchers into the process. So on one side, to work as non-professional actors, and this was the same for the children and teenagers. And for example, for the senior researchers, they were more involved in script writing. So this continued to evolve into other projects. For example, the another project was more related to how we could bring, and also because I worked for a long time in a biomedical research center, so we were very much connected to the hospital. And we brought a group of patients already from the phase that we were writing a project, and they were involved in different phases, but they very much help us into shaping how we were communicating first the results, but also the process to other patients that were participating in the research process, and then just to the general public. So it was something that grew organically and more recently evolved to what we call citizen science. So citizen science is an approach that you can use to bring people to participate directly in different phases of the research process. And this you have this double way of producing science.
That makes so much sense, especially targeting this idea that scientists are not relatable, that they're somehow a different species. I don't know any scientists. There's the other, which makes it very easy to caricature or dismiss or to denigrate the work that they do. And what you're doing to really create these pathways that flow both ways and not just, and also as part of informing the research itself. I want to actually ask you a question about that, which relates to the patients that you talked about. Is the idea there that these are patients who might be dealing with certain conditions that actually scientists at the time are also working on to alleviate or to mitigate?
I think, for example, if you go more into participatory research, there is another term that is more commonly used for patients. So it's people with lived experience,
Hmm.
which I also think is more inclusive to what we are normally thinking about on only the patient as an object of investigation. I think there are multiple ways of having this involvement and the impact they can have. For example, in one instance, you can improve, for example, for those participating in clinical trials, specifically the hour when they're coming. It can be also connected to the ethical, to improve ethical approaches to connect with the patient, but also again how you can communicate. I think one of the best experience that I had was actually of patients or people with live experience in sharing what were their real concerns at the time. And sometimes their real concerns of their daily life is not getting cured, but it can be, for example, having a baby or dealing with pain. At the research, we were very much interested into finding the cure, but we also have to have this opportunity. And I think science communication can have this, create this avenue of listening to what are the real needs and how we can help to tackle in real time the real needs of the people with live experience.
Wow, that is so wonderful. And I'm going to ask you to take us on location to one of your filmmaking projects. But before I do that, I want to let listeners know about a free science communication resource. It can be tough to translate complex topics into engaging, memorable, and still accurate descriptions of the real world value of your work. And at the same time, this type of translation, it can be critical for getting funding, buy-in for your ideas, and promote it faster. But the good news is you can get your own free copy of an infographic that I've developed that's become a go to valuable resource for scientists. It is called 11 Keys to Translating Complexity. If you'd like to get this free resource, just go to complexitymadeclear.com and you can get your very own copy. That's complexitymadeclear.com to get your copy. Joanna, I want to ask you now to give us a sense of what it's like to be on location for one of these filmmaking projects that you're leading.
Yeah, this was a little bit a while ago because now my focus changed a little bit in terms of the process that I'm leading. But I have to say that, again, it was a very multidisciplinary project. So I was very much brought into a television production team where I had this opportunity to co-direct with my colleague at the time. So we did a co-direction, two television series actually. So one was more related into to explaining very simply scientific concepts, but connected to the state of the art. And the second one was more related to the future professions that could come out, and they are now not futures, but they are real. That's how different roles that you can have from different fields and have an impact in health. So, for example, a tissue engineer, but also how a data science can influence directly in the biomedical research, and that when you go to the hospital you don't see. It was very interesting to see, for example, the interest of children not only on participating on a television show that of course always has that hook, but also because they were really interested in science, and they also want to be closer to the scientists that lived on their areas. No, because sometimes it is very abstract, and also mostly the scientists that come into television or interviews are older, so they need closer references so that they can see themselves as a cousin, maybe a teacher or a monitor at a museum. So they need closer references to identify. And the fact that we actually used non professional actors, that some of them were scientists, were working at the museum, so they were their real life professions, it created this link and this bond that I know that it still continues to make a significant difference within the local communities. Of course, this is a process that could be replicated in other places. So, of course, normally in television production, you can sell the rights or you just have it streamed somewhere else. But I think here, how the project itself was done, it could be replicated in other places so that you can have a long-term effect within the communities.
Yeah, that experience of doing this production together and beginning relationships, and like you're saying, that could continue further networking opportunities, maybe internship opportunities that are happening years later because you created this experience, this opportunity for these groups to come together is just really exciting. And another theme that you've mentioned, both as we're speaking and earlier as we've had a chance to chat offline, is oftentimes when we focus on science communication, it's like how can we explain science to the public in accessible ways or get young people excited about doing science, which all are so important. You've also found that there's another pathway that really isn't talked about as much, at least not in the US, that involves connecting with and learning from communities that actually can help reshape scientists, the way scientists do science. And you talked a little bit about this earlier with lived experience and how that loop can happen. Can you tell us some more, or maybe if there's a story or something that comes to mind about that loop that we often see as maybe a one-way direction, but really can flow both ways to the benefit of everyone involved?
So I think this experience came in the last year. So when I entered Science for Change, there was already an ongoing project called Newsera. So it was about connecting citizen science with science communication. And we worked with 30 projects from Italy, Spain, and Portugal, and how they could improve their already ongoing citizen science projects in terms of connecting to different audiences. So this could be citizens, this could be the media, it could be policymakers. So the fact that they done participatory exercises into reshaping how they were communicating, this created new opportunities. So, for example, another of these target audiences was the industry. So, one specific example that I can share is we had one researcher from Portugal that works with microplastics and the impact in the oceans. So, she never really actually thought about approaching the industry, right? So, this was something that was proposed in the project. And she started to connect with local industries in Portugal. It was done in a very informal approach. So they actually started to rethink and invite her to different conferences that they were organizing. They normally were very much close to the industry themselves, and started to think how they could use this in their production processes and could tackle the problem at early stages. So I think this is, for example, this is an example that I think it was very beneficial. Or another one was, since we have projects that were either from Portugal and Spain, so it's possible that you don't know and the audience too, but the majority of the rivers in Portugal actually are born in Spain. And we detected that there were a lot of citizen science projects that were led with local communities through the same rivers, but they weren't connected at all because they were working with different languages, with different sides of the borders. So the fact that we were able to bring them together and think, oh, actually they could track and monitor the full stream of a river across borders and how to connect the local communities that are within different borders for a same goal. I think this was also something that it's still in early stages, but I think it will have good results in the future.
Really exciting. And I want to talk a little bit more about this other program that you've referenced in the past, which is the government of Spain initiating a range of science for policy programs, which is gaining momentum.
Yeah, exactly. So as I was mentioning just now, so I think one thing very important, and now I'm thinking also because of the main audience of this podcast, is that researchers or scientists have to understand that we have different audiences, right? And policymakers are one of the target audiences that we need to take into account. There are specific messages, there are specific channels and formats in order to approach this type of audience or stakeholder. And also, we need to understand that part of our role has to be on supporting evidence informed policies. We need to make this step. So I think there have been different initiatives that are being supported also by the European Commission, and then how different member states are taking in these different initiatives. So in Spain, that's where we are based. It's more recent, but we had in the last years the creation of an office at the parliament level. This year there was the announcement from the prime minister that there was going to be created, and they are in the process of creating also an advisory group at the ministry level, so all the different ministries. And they also created a funding program that is open to all research centers and universities in Spain with two streams. One for research projects with the public administration, specifically to incorporate evidence informed policies at multiple levels, because it can be either local, regional, or national policy programs. And another one is how you can actually implement this. So it's to create opportunities to have a peer mentoring scheme, or you can have different types of formats of meetings and conferences so that there is a transfer of knowledge from what is being produced in the academia into the public government.
Joanna, you've mentioned so many moving parts, so many exciting initiatives, things that have been underway for a while, things that are under development, just a lot of positive momentum. And I'm wondering for listeners who are interested in these areas, maybe they're still earning their PhDs, they're interested in exploring the field of science communication from these different angles, perhaps that you talked about. How would you recommend that folks in that situation accelerate their learning, increase their exposure to the field, maybe even while they're still earning their degree, or maybe as they're thinking about their next step in their career?
Yeah, I think on both those stages, it's extremely important. And I think the sooner the better. Right, that of course we know that there are challenges and barriers because researchers normally lack time. Of course, we know that they have other priorities because the priority, of course, is to publish. But I think the fact that now we are also moving into a different way of rewarding and recognizing the advancement of the scientific careers, that there is an opportunity for better and more social engagements. And I think this is an advantage and is the momentum to actually invest in these specific skills and competences related to communication. So I think it's a window of opportunity, and there are a lot of programs that can happen at the undergraduate level, but there are also, of course, private companies that are supporting in these skills and competences. And of course, I would like to, in this case, mention the project that we are creating now. So it's the European Competence Center for Science Communication, where we wish to tackle this in terms of the European level. Of course, it is going to be based on a virtual platform, so it's open to researchers from around the world too. And we actually want to have these connections, especially with the global south, so that we can also have other forms of science communication incorporated in how we think and how we do science communication. But we really wish to provide what is targeted training in terms of increasing the social perception of science, targeting different stakeholders that we mentioned throughout the program. And also, of course, one thing very important is how to support trust in science, in scientists, and in public institutions, right? And we have seen how now different geopolitical situations can also have an impact. So, of course, we need to protect and learn how to protect ourselves and ourselves as communicators or journalists or researchers into attacks, into protect ourselves from misinformation and disinformation, and how we can thrive in the world, of course.
Dr. Joana Magalhães, this was such an energetic, expert, and really optimistic, dynamic conversation. Just fantastic. I know listeners are going to really enjoy this. Thanks for being on the show. Thank you for sharing your insights. And thanks for all the work that you and your team, your colleagues are doing to really make an impact on multiple fronts.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And yeah, I hope that the listeners like. And of course, just get in touch with us if there's more information that is needed. We're very
And
happy.
wonderful. And we'll make sure to include links to different organizations, initiatives that you mentioned so that people can find those very easily in the show notes that accompany this episode. Listeners, thanks for being here for this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.